Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I left on a business trip expecting nothing more than a few days away to clear my mind, but what I returned to at home was far from ordinary. The moment I stepped through the door, a subtle disquiet settled in my chest. Everything looked the same at first glance. The familiar scent of coffee lingering in the kitchen, the same cozy furnishings in the living room. But as I moved through the house, I began to notice small, unsettling changes. In the hallway, a framed photograph that once hung perfectly aligned now appeared slightly askew, as if hastily adjusted in my absence. I found a stack of envelopes on the table that I didn't recall seeing before. One, in particular, was neatly sealed with a wax stamp, its contents unknown, yet its presence hinted at a secret. Over dinner that evening, while I tried to engage in the usual small talk with Vanessa, I sensed an unusual air around her. Her smile was a little too polished, her responses a bit too measured. When I casually asked about her day, she simply replied, "It was busy, Mark. Lots of student recitals and planning for next week." There was an odd sparkle in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse of something I couldn't quite place. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to the hectic pace of her work as a music teacher, but as the night wore on, subtle clues began to emerge. On my laptop, while checking my emails, I found a reminder for an event that wasn't on our shared calendar, a local concert at a venue I hadn't visited in years. My curiosity piqued. I casually mentioned it to Vanessa the next morning. "I saw an invite for a local band's gig. Sounds fun, doesn't it?" I asked, expecting her to express interest in joining. Instead, she laughed lightly and replied, "Oh, Mark, I have too much on my plate with my recitals. I wouldn't miss my commitments for anything." But her tone, though pleasant, felt rehearsed, leaving me with a sense of unease that grew with each passing day. Over the following week, I noticed that the time she claimed to be occupied with her students and lesson plans began to stretch longer than usual. There were instances when she would leave the house with an excuse of a last-minute meeting and return with an air of hurried excitement, her phone screen quickly hidden from view. I started to question whether these changes were mere coincidences or signs of something more. The tension escalated when I discovered a small gift tucked away behind a stack of brochures on the coffee table, a token that seemed too lavish to have been a spontaneous gesture between us. It was wrapped in elegant paper, and the accompanying note, though unsigned, hinted at appreciation and admiration. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I let the gift remain as a silent enigma while I watched her behavior with increasing vigilance. One evening, during a routine family gathering at our neighbor's house, I noticed Vanessa exchange an unusually prolonged glance with a familiar face, a man I recognized from the local band's promotional materials, but who, at that moment, she introduced casually as just a friend. His presence, though brief, sparked a curiosity that lingered long after the event. I found myself replaying the scene in my mind, wondering if I was misreading a harmless connection or if there was a deeper secret lurking beneath her well-practiced lies. In quiet moments, as I sat alone reviewing the small details of our everyday life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house whispered secrets in its silence, and each misplaced item, each altered schedule, became a clue in a puzzle that I was only beginning to understand. I resolved then that I would keep my eyes open, gather every small anomaly, and trust my intuition, even if it meant facing a truth I wasn't fully prepared to accept. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind racing with unanswered questions, I embarked on a silent quest for the truth, unaware that the seeds of betrayal had been sown long before my return. I returned home from a solo fishing trip, expecting the familiar comfort of our little house to greet me. The quiet of the front porch was unchanged, but as I stepped inside, subtle details began to disturb me. The living room looked almost identical, yet something felt off, like a note slightly out of tune in a well-rehearsed melody. I noticed that the clock on the mantel had been reset by a few minutes, and a couple of framed photographs seemed to be rearranged, as if someone had taken the time to alter the ambience in my absence. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my own weariness from the trip, but a lingering unease clung to me throughout the evening. At dinner, as I sat with Lindsay, my beloved music teacher, whose passion for her work was one of the things I admired most, her eyes flickered away from mine when I asked about her day. "It was busy, Mark," she replied with a too-casual smile. "I had a few student recitals to attend and then some extra sessions with a colleague." Her voice carried a hint of distraction that I couldn't quite place, but I let it go. Later that night, while I was tidying up in the study, I found a small envelope tucked behind a stack of mail on the desk. It was addressed in elegant handwriting, and inside, I discovered a ticket to a concert at a local venue, a ticket that wasn't mentioned on our shared calendar. The design was striking, and I couldn't help but wonder why Lindsay would keep such a gift hidden. As the days passed, I began noticing little inconsistencies. A new gym bag tucked away in the closet, receipts from trendy cafes I'd never heard her mention, and text messages that buzzed quietly on her phone, which she always hurriedly hid when I entered the room. At a parent-teacher night last week, I caught a glimpse of her in a lively conversation with a young man who introduced himself as a friend of the school, a fleeting moment of intimacy that struck me as unusual. His presence had seemed so natural, and yet something in the way she laughed at his jokes felt rehearsed. I mulled over these details as I reviewed my daily routines and found my mind quietly assembling a puzzle I hadn't realized was missing pieces. In the solitude of our now strangely silent home, I began jotting down small observations in a worn leather notebook, trying to discern whether these changes were innocent or something more. My curiosity was piqued when I noticed that on nights she claimed to be working late on lesson plans, she would return home later than usual, her face a mask of distraction that dissipated as soon as I looked away. "There's something you're not telling me," I mused silently, though I couldn't yet put a finger on what it might be. One afternoon, while sitting in our sunlit kitchen and reviewing a magazine, I overheard a conversation from the next room, where our neighbor, Tom, mentioned having seen Lindsay near the backstage area of a local gig, a detail that didn't fit her usual schedule at all. "I thought she was just in her recitals," I recalled him saying, his tone casual yet curious. That comment added another layer to my growing uncertainty. The more I pieced together, the more the subtle hints began to suggest that there was more to her late-night sessions than simple work. And yet, when I asked her casually one evening, "Lindsay, you mentioned you'd be meeting someone after the recital. What's that about?" She brushed it off with a light laugh and said, "Oh, it was just a friend from the community. Nothing serious." Her answer felt too polished, too rehearsed, leaving me with an echo of doubt. Just when I thought I had a grasp on the situation, another twist emerged. At a local art fair last weekend, I encountered a charming man named Alex, who greeted Lindsay warmly. He seemed to be an admirer of her work, complimenting her on her vibrant energy. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if Alex might be the one behind those mysterious nights. But as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that Alex was nothing more than a supportive friend, someone who genuinely appreciated her talent and dedication to teaching. His presence, though initially suspicious, ultimately served as a red herring, a reminder that not every anomaly was a sign of betrayal. Despite this, the puzzle remained incomplete, and as I closed my notebook that night, my mind was a tangled web of observations, half-formed theories, and an aching desire for the truth. I resolved to keep watching, gathering every stray detail until I could finally discern whether these disturbances were mere coincidences or the first signs of a betrayal that would shatter the harmony of our lives. I returned home one late afternoon, still reeling from the subtle hints that had begun to unsettle me since my trip. As I stepped into the living room, something unusual caught my eye. On the coffee table sat a small, elegantly wrapped box that I hadn't seen before. Its pristine paper and delicate ribbon contrasted sharply with the usual clutter of bills and magazines. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully picked it up. Inside, I found a beautifully crafted set of designer cufflinks, sleek, understated, and clearly far too luxurious for our modest lifestyle. I remembered that Lindsay had once casually mentioned a new gift she'd received for someone special, but she never elaborated further. At that moment, A silent storm of suspicion and calculated mischief took hold of me. Rather than confronting her immediately, I decided to turn this discovery into a small act of rebellion. I knew that if Lindsay intended these cufflinks for her secret admirer, then I could spoil the surprise without alerting her to my awareness. That night, while Lindsay was asleep after a long day, supposedly spent preparing lesson plans, I crept into the study and retrieved the cufflinks. In their place, I carefully arranged a replacement gift, a pair of outrageously gaudy neon-colored cufflinks I had ordered online just for this purpose. Their design was absurd, a sharp, undeniable contrast to the elegance of the original set. I rewrapped the replacement with the same care as the first, ensuring that nothing would suggest the switch. The next morning, I sat down for breakfast, trying to appear completely nonchalant as I casually brought up the mysterious package. "Lindsay, I found a box on the coffee table when I got home. Do you know anything about it?" I asked, my tone light, but my eyes studying her reaction. She paused, her spoon hovering midair as her gaze flickered to the box. "Oh, that? It must have been a delivery mistake," she said quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded rehearsed. I nodded, though inside I was already constructing a mental checklist of her subsequent behavior. Over the following days, I kept a discreet eye on her. I watched as she occasionally opened the box to check the cufflinks, a slight frown creasing her forehead before she replaced them without a word. At times, I noticed her glancing at her phone more often than usual, and when I passed by the room, she would hastily tuck it away. It was as if the replacement had struck a nerve, a clue that something was not as it seemed. I began jotting down notes in a hidden journal, marking the dates and times of her odd behaviors. Every subtle detail, the extra time she spent in the study, the quick, furtive glances at her phone, the unexpected changes in her schedule, added another layer to the mystery. My mind buzzed with possibilities. Could the original cufflinks have been a gift for someone else? Had she been planning a secret rendezvous, using those cufflinks as a token? The more I observed, the more convinced I became that Lindsay was hiding something far more elaborate than a simple delivery error. I resolved to monitor her closely, watching for any additional clues that might corroborate my growing suspicions. In quiet moments, I rehearsed potential confrontations in my head, though I vowed to keep my emotions in check and not let my rising curiosity turn into an outright accusation. I must remain calm, I told myself. Let the evidence speak for itself. As the days passed, the replacement cufflinks sat in their box, a silent symbol of the deception I suspected, waiting for the truth to emerge. Each time Lindsay glanced at them with a hint of unease, I felt a surge of vindication tempered by the need for further proof. I knew I was on the right track, even if the full extent of the betrayal remained shrouded in uncertainty. And so, with a determined resolve, I promised myself to continue gathering every detail until I could finally piece together the puzzle of her hidden life. I began to notice subtle irregularities in Lindsay's behavior that made my mind churn with uneasy questions. Every time she mentioned a late night at a student recital, her explanation was filled with vague details and a hurried smile that seemed rehearsed. Over the past week, I had taken careful note of her schedule and her increasingly distracted manner. I kept a small notebook where I jotted down the times she left the house and the inconsistencies in her explanations. One evening, as I sat in the study reviewing these notes, a particular incident replayed in my mind. The time she claimed to have stayed late preparing lesson plans, only to return home with her eyes fixated on her phone and a nervous twitch that I couldn't quite explain. The suspicion gnawed at me until I decided to confront the situation head-on without provoking an immediate argument. One night, as we sat in our living room after dinner, I decided to broach the subject. "Lindsay," I began gently, "I've noticed you've been coming home later than usual these past few nights. Is everything all right?" Her eyes darted briefly, and she forced a smile. "Oh, Mark, you know how busy the school can be. I'm just caught up with preparing for the recitals and working on lesson plans." But her tone, too smooth and practiced, did little to quell the rising tide of my doubts. Over the next several days, I watched her more closely. I noted that on certain nights, when she said she was finishing up her work, She would slip away with her phone pressed tightly to her ear, and her voice would lower to a conspiratorial whisper whenever I passed by. My mind raced with possibilities. Had I been too trusting? Was there another reason for her unexplained absences? I began to suspect that perhaps her nightly escapades were not entirely about the school at all. Fueled by both worry and a desire to understand, I started scanning our shared devices for any clue that might confirm my fears. One afternoon, while pretending to organize some files on our computer, I noticed a series of unsaved messages on her tablet. They were fragments, references to an event tonight and a special session, details that didn't match her usual descriptions of school events. My heart pounded as I read them, convinced that I was on the brink of uncovering a hidden truth. That evening, after dinner, I confronted her once more, unable to contain the tension any longer. "Lindsay, I saw some messages on your tablet that mentioned a special session tonight. Can you explain what that means?" She paused, her eyes widening momentarily before she quickly recovered with a laugh. "Mark, you're overthinking things. It's just extra planning for an upcoming recital. There's nothing more to it." Her dismissal felt too facile, yet as I pressed for more details, the conversation grew heated. "It doesn't add up," I insisted softly. "I'm trying to understand, but your stories keep changing." For a tense moment, silence reigned as she struggled to find words. Then, in a rush, she blurted out, "Maybe you're just imagining things. I have so much on my mind with work. I can't be bothered with every little detail." Her tone left no room for further inquiry, and though a part of me wanted to explode with anger, I forced myself to step back and consider the possibility that I might be misinterpreting harmless coincidences. Over the next few days, I continued my quiet surveillance, determined to gather more evidence before jumping to any conclusions. I even cross-checked the timestamps on her messages with our shared calendar, and to my astonishment, many of the supposed late sessions matched perfectly with legitimate school events. The more I delved into the data, the more I realized that my growing suspicions might have been fueled by my own anxiety rather than hard evidence. In that moment of introspection, I admitted to myself that perhaps my mind had played tricks on me, magnifying every minor discrepancy into a potential betrayal. The notes in my journal began to reflect both my doubts and the conflicting evidence that suggested her behavior was indeed erratic, but not necessarily disloyal. I resolved, with a heavy heart, to give Lindsay the benefit of the doubt, for now, while continuing to observe without confrontation. "Maybe it's all just a misunderstanding," I whispered to myself as I closed the journal that night. Though a seed of suspicion still lingered, I chose to trust that the truth would eventually emerge on its own, untainted by my growing fears. And so, with a cautious hope and an enduring desire for clarity, I vowed to remain vigilant, determined to piece together every detail until I could finally discern whether my worries were justified or simply the product of an overactive mind. I continued to gather every fragment of evidence, and as the days passed, the pieces of this unsettling puzzle began to form a pattern that I couldn't ignore. I reviewed the emails, the phone records, and the peculiar gaps in her schedule with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, and each detail pointed toward a possibility I had feared yet was not entirely sure of. One evening, as I sat in my study under the soft glow of a desk lamp, I reread a series of messages that mentioned backstage passes and VIP access at a local venue, a detail that didn't fit with Lindsay's usual recounting of student recitals and lesson plans. My heart pounded as I typed out a few notes in my journal, careful to record the times and context, wondering if these clues were part of an innocent mistake or a sign of something more. I decided to revisit the venue the next day, this time arriving unannounced, blending in as just another local. As I walked through the lobby, I caught snippets of conversation about a popular band performing later that night. The venue itself was abuzz with excitement and anticipation, and I couldn't help but compare the fervor around the concert to the cool detachment Lindsay had displayed lately. I found a quiet corner near the entrance and listened as staff mentioned a special guest who had been seen backstage after previous shows, his presence cloaked in mystery. Though they didn't name him, the mention of backstage stirred my suspicions further. Later that day, back at home, I casually broached the subject with Lindsay over dinner, attempting to keep my tone light. Lindsay, I noticed that our local venue is hosting a big concert tonight. Have you ever thought of going? Maybe to support the band or learn something new for your classes? I asked, watching her reaction carefully. She paused, her fork hovering midair as her eyes quickly shifted away. Oh, that? No, Mark. I'm quite busy with the recitals and planning for the next term, she replied, her voice smooth but with a fleeting edge that I couldn't quite place. I nodded slowly, though inside I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of me hoped it was nothing, yet another part of me feared it was the tip of a larger deception. Later, when I was alone, I sifted through the latest batch of texts on her tablet, finding a new set of messages that mentioned meeting someone for a special training session that evening. The words were innocuous enough, but the timing was off. She had claimed to be at a school event until late, yet the messages were time-stamped well after she was supposed to have returned. My mind raced, and I realized that this wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was another thread in the tangled web of her excuses. There's something here, I muttered to myself, my voice low and resolute as I copied the messages into my journal. I decided to extend my surveillance, setting up a discreet system to note every deviation from her usual routine. I even arranged with a neighbor to casually mention if they saw her near the venue at odd hours. Every small detail now contributed to a mounting sense of certainty that Lindsay was leading a double life. But amid all these clues, I struggled with a nagging doubt. Could my own fear be twisting innocent events into something sinister? One late afternoon, as I sat on the back steps of our house reviewing my notes, I overheard a fragment of conversation from a passerby mentioning the venue's backstage access being granted to special guests and a certain VIP. The name wasn't clear, but it was enough to intensify my suspicions. I realized that I was on the brink of a discovery that could shatter the illusion of our domestic life. My pulse quickened as I resolved to continue this investigation until every stone was turned. I'm on the right track, I whispered to myself in the fading light, a mix of determination and anxious hope fueling my words. I knew that the truth was there, hidden behind a façade of rehearsed explanations and convenient schedules, and I vowed to piece it together, one detail at a time, until I could finally see what lay beneath. Every minute of that long, restless week had led me to this final moment, a culmination of doubts, careful notes, and the growing certainty that my wife, Lindsay, was not who she claimed to be. I had spent countless evenings poring over her vague texts, comparing her late-night schedule with the routine of student recitals she so often mentioned, and my mind had steadily pieced together a pattern of unexplained absences and hurried departures. The turning point came one cool autumn night when I noticed her leaving the house later than usual, a look of furtive determination etched across her face as she grabbed her coat. I followed at a discreet distance, my heart pounding in a mix of anger and apprehension, determined to catch a glimpse of the truth that had eluded me for far too long. My instincts had led me to a trendy music venue on the outskirts of town, a place where local bands played and where the atmosphere pulsed with the raw energy of live performance. I parked a few cars away and blended into the shadows as I watched people stream into the building. Minutes later, I saw her, Lindsay, dressed in a stylish jacket and heels that clicked purposefully on the pavement, entering the venue with a confidence that contradicted the soft, reassuring persona she had at home. My pulse raced as I pulled out my phone and began recording, capturing her every step as she made her way toward the backstage entrance. I could barely contain the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Each beat of my heart was a reminder of the betrayal I had long suspected. I recalled the countless times she had dismissed my concerns with a laugh, saying, "I'm just busy with work, Mark," or "I'm supporting local music. You know how it is." But now, as I watched her slip past the security guard and vanish into the labyrinth of corridors, I knew there was no mistaking the truth. I retraced my steps to the rear of the venue, where the air was cooler and the neon glow of exit signs lent an otherworldly quality to the night. I took refuge behind a set of doors, my body tense and every sense heightened. Through a small, grimy window, I caught sight of a figure approaching Lindsay, a man whose presence, though obscured by shadow, radiated an unmistakable intimacy. I listened intently, straining to catch any words, any detail that would reveal his identity. I heard fragments of conversation, whispers of the next show and see you backstage, but nothing clear enough to name him. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but at the same time, I felt a surge of vindication. The woman I thought I knew was entangled in something far more than a harmless distraction. This is it, I muttered to myself, a quiet, resolute whisper in the darkness. My mind was ablaze with images of the countless inconsistencies and half-truths that had haunted me for weeks, and now, all that remained was to capture this moment as undeniable proof of my suspicions. I positioned my phone carefully, ensuring that every movement in the dim corridor would be recorded, every glimpse of their clandestine meeting preserved. As I waited, the seconds stretched into eternity. The tension in the air was palpable, and my thoughts swirled between anger and a grim determination to confront the reality of this betrayal. I remembered every excuse, every careful lie Lindsay had offered, and each one now felt like a deliberate thread in the tapestry of her deception. In that quiet, charged moment, I resolved that I would not allow any further delay. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come, and prepared to step out of the shadows. I was about to catch her in the act. My evidence, my proof, the culmination of months of silent observation. And though a part of me still struggled with the weight of disbelief, my resolve was unyielding. My heart pounded as I gripped my phone tighter, ready to record the final chapter of this long-hidden betrayal. The truth was nearly within my grasp, and as I edged closer to the door, I knew that nothing would ever be the same after this night. Late one rainy evening, I knew the time had come. The evidence had been mounting for weeks, and now I was ready to catch Lindsay in the very act of betrayal. I positioned myself near the dimly lit backstage corridor of the band's venue, a place she had been frequenting under the guise of attending student recitals. The rain drummed softly on the roof above as I concealed myself behind a stack of unused equipment, my pulse steady but my mind racing with anticipation. I had followed her meticulously for days, gathering all the clues that pointed to a secret life far removed from the routine she claimed. Tonight, I was determined to see the truth for myself, to capture every moment of deception with cold, unwavering clarity. I watched as Lindsay, dressed in a casual yet elegant outfit, slipped quietly past the security checkpoint. She moved with a purposeful grace, her eyes fixed ahead, as if she belonged in that shadowy world. My heart pounded as I clutched my phone, already set to record. I crept forward silently, careful not to be seen, until I reached a narrow gap behind a heavy curtain that separated the public area from the private dressing room. There, I glimpsed the unmistakable scene that had haunted my suspicions. Lindsay, seemingly at ease, was standing near a counter, talking quietly with a man whose presence could not be denied. The man's features were partially hidden by a low hat and dim lighting, but his confident stance and the casual way he leaned in close to her confirmed everything I had feared. I pressed my phone closer, capturing the hushed exchange. "I told you, everything's set for tonight," the man murmured, his voice smooth and controlled. Lindsay responded with a laugh that carried an edge of complicity. "I know. I'll be ready for the encore." Their words, exchanged with a disturbing familiarity, sent a chill through me. Every detail, the way she reached out to accept a folded note from him, the subtle glance they shared, solidified the betrayal I had long suspected. I felt no remorse as I recorded the scene, only a steely resolve to gather the irrefutable proof that would end the charade once and for all. Stepping back into the shadow, I continued to observe, ensuring that every moment was documented. I could sense their awareness had not yet been aroused, and I allowed the recording to capture their final whispered words before they parted ways and disappeared down separate corridors. With the evidence secure in my phone, I slowly withdrew from the area, my mind already racing with the next steps in my plan. I had no intention of causing a scene that night. My purpose was to let the undeniable truth speak for itself when the moment was right. Driving home in the quiet drizzle, I felt a mix of grim satisfaction and cold determination. The footage on my phone was the culmination of months of careful observation and silent vigilance, a piece of evidence that would soon shatter the fragile illusions Lindsay had built around our lives. I replayed the recording over and over, each viewing reinforcing my resolve to reclaim the dignity that had been eroded by her deceit. There was no anger for the loss of what once was, only a deep, unwavering focus on the future that awaited me, a future where truth and integrity would be restored. In that quiet, solitary drive home, I knew that the next chapter of my life was about to begin, and with it, the promise of a fresh start free from lies. I resolved that when the time came, I would confront Lindsay not with a rush of uncontrolled fury, but with a measured act of justice that would leave no room for denial. The evidence was mine, and soon the world would see the truth. Late one rainy evening, I knew the time had come. The evidence had been mounting for weeks, and now I was ready to catch Lindsay in the very act of betrayal. I positioned myself near the dimly lit backstage corridor of the band's venue, a place she had been frequenting under the guise of attending student recitals. The rain drummed softly on the roof above as I concealed myself behind a stack of unused equipment, my pulse steady but my mind racing with anticipation. I had followed her meticulously for days, gathering all the clues that pointed to a secret life far removed from the routine she claimed. Tonight, I was determined to see the truth for myself, to capture every moment of deception with cold, unwavering clarity. I watched as Lindsay, dressed in a casual yet elegant outfit, slipped quietly past the security checkpoint. She moved with a purposeful grace, her eyes fixed ahead as if she belonged in that shadowy world. My heart pounded as I clutched my phone, already set to record. I crept forward silently, careful not to be seen, until I reached a narrow gap behind a heavy curtain that separated the public area from the private dressing room. There, I glimpsed the unmistakable scene that had haunted my suspicions. Lindsay, seemingly at ease, was standing near a counter, talking quietly with a man whose presence could not be denied. The man's features were partially hidden by a low hat and dim lighting, but his confident stance and the casual way he leaned in close to her confirmed everything I had feared. I pressed my phone closer, capturing the hushed exchange. "I told you, everything's set for tonight," the man murmured, his voice smooth and controlled. Lindsay responded with a laugh that carried an edge of complicity. "I know. I'll be ready for the encore." Their words, exchanged with a disturbing familiarity, sent a chill through me. Every detail, the way she reached out to accept a folded note from him, the subtle glance they shared, solidified the betrayal I had long suspected. I felt no remorse as I recorded the scene, only a steely resolve to gather the irrefutable proof that would end the charade once and for all. Stepping back into the shadow, I continued to observe, ensuring that every moment was documented. I could sense their awareness had not yet been aroused, and I allowed the recording to capture their final whispered words before they parted ways and disappeared down separate corridors. With the evidence secure in my phone, I slowly withdrew from the area, my mind already racing with the next steps in my plan. I had no intention of causing a scene that night. My purpose was to let the undeniable truth speak for itself when the moment was right. Driving home in the quiet drizzle, I felt a mix of grim satisfaction and cold determination. The footage on my phone was the culmination of months of careful observation and silent vigilance, a piece of evidence that would soon shatter the fragile illusions Lindsay had built around our lives. I replayed the recording over and over, each viewing reinforcing my resolve to reclaim the dignity that had been eroded by her deceit. There was no anger for the loss of what once was, only a deep, unwavering focus on the future that awaited me, a future where truth and integrity would be restored. In that quiet, solitary drive home, I knew that the next chapter of my life was about to begin, and with it, the promise of a fresh start free from lies. I resolved that when the time came, I would confront Lindsay not with a rush of uncontrolled fury, but with a measured act of justice that would leave no room for denial. The evidence was mine, and soon the world would see the truth. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.